going to just take off from where we were previous session. So we looked really at the interface and how to use it, and then how to import images in, get them into the catalog, and some of the cataloging techniques. So I thought I'll go through from the development side today. So assuming we've got some images into the catalog, we've done whatever we need to do with them in there. So we'll actually go through just how to use some of the processing techniques. Obviously processing is a very personal thing. It depends whether you want to go sort of down the realistic route, whether you want to go down an artistic route. Again, it depends on the type of photography that you like to do, whether you're doing portrait or sports or landscape. Everything that I'm going to really show today is landscape, because that's my passion. But I've tried to pick out a few different examples so I can show you some of the techniques and some of the tools within Lightroom, just to give you an understanding of what you can do. I can't teach you how to use it all together, because again, that's personal technique. But you can certainly refer back to the video afterwards and then go away and have a play yourself with some of your own photographs, and hopefully from today you'll get an idea of some of the things that you can do in it, and obviously combining some of these things together, you can do an awful lot. And then what we'll do at the end, we'll just kind of, depending on time, look at just a few sort of simple things for exports. And then also I can touch on a couple of other little things. Again, if we've got time, some plugins and other things that you can do with Lightroom. So I'm going to try and follow a basic workflow process as well using this, so just to give you an idea of the kind of steps that you can follow in Lightroom, so that when you're adjusting your images, you're trying to do it in the right order, so that one thing isn't actually making something else worse. So when you certainly do it in a certain order, if you get that wrong, as I found to my horror, and it took me a long time to work out what was going wrong, each time I was doing certain things, it was boosting the color. And because it was doing it so gradually, at the end, I was like, it was 11 o'clock at night. I was quite tired. I was really pleased with the image that I'd got. I'd stick it up on Facebook as quick as I possibly could, go to bed, wake up in the morning and think, oh my God, Salvador Dali's been at one of my photographs. What the hell has gone on? And it took me ages to work out. I mean, I do like sort of vibrant colors. That's just personal taste. But there's natural with a bit of punch, and there's over the top, and I was definitely well into the over the top route. So the workflow I'm going to go through will hopefully give you an indication, and I'm happy to share some documentation I've got with Mike afterwards that he can share around, which is freely available on the internet, so there's no copyright issues, and it's got the simple workflow that I follow. And I've actually paid for to go on the guy's course as well, so I've gone into it in a bit more detail. So starting off with, we've got some photographs here on the screen. They're in the library module, so you can see in the top right hand corner, I've gone in and where we talked about last time, I turned off the things that are not of interest to me at the moment, or that I never use. So I've trimmed it right down just to library and develop, because that's all I really want to see. In the bottom left hand corner down here, you've got the different views. So I'm currently in grid view. I can go to loop view, so I can look at the particular images, and I can use the thumbnail view across the bottom to go between the various images to choose the ones that I want to look at and I want to develop. So if we just pick on any photograph, so it doesn't really matter for this one, what I'm going to, one of the first things that you can do, and we touched on it briefly previously, is when you import them, you can apply some preset adjustments to your image as part of the import process, and I do that. So just to show you what some of those are, in the detail, one of the things that I do is normally that will come in as 25% sharpening is turned on the right hand panel there. So one of the presets I have is to remove sharpening, because I want to do that myself later. I don't want the Lightroom applying that straight away. In the let me just do a reset on that back to its normal. Where are we in here? So in the lens correction, you've got remove chromatic aberration and enable profile corrections. So that's automatically detected the camera and the lens that I was using. And chromatic aberration can be the sort of color fringing around the edge of high contrast edges, where you can get sort of purpley green edges, particularly on sort of straight edges in architectural type photography. So those again are automatic. And the final one that I would typically do in here is to come in and apply the color profile that I want to choose. So typically I would come in for something like camera faithful or camera landscape, which will give you a slight bit more punch to the color. So again, you can customize this to your own taste and say, actually, everything comes in with faithful, and if I want to give it a little punch, you could go in and then just manually change that yourself if you need to. So those are simple automated things for me during the process, but I think that those are 4 things that typically go through every single time when you load it in. The next one is the white balance. One for me, still an area that I suppose till fairly recently found it quite difficult getting the right balance. And I've chosen a photograph here just to kind of show you the difference between it. So in here you've got the basic panel, and if you remember from the previous session, we said working sort of left to right, top to bottom. So again, we're starting at the top here, working our way down. So the first thing you hit is the white balance here. So you can adjust the tint and the temperature yourself. You've got a drop down here, which obviously as you shot it, as you took the photograph, you can go to auto and the camera will work out what it thinks are the right one. You can switch back to what you had previously, or if you wanted to just play around with these, you can go to different sorry, wrong click there, that one there, and then you can obviously go into the horrendous ones. Sometimes that's quite nice because it will give you a taste of what the image might look like, and you might see something that takes you down a particular route. If you want to go down the kind of more natural look, what you're tending to look for on an image is 50% neutral grey. And then what you can use is the eyedropper tool on here to click this, come onto the image and find 50% neutral grey. And then if you click that eyedropper on that particular color, that will set your white balance very accurately. The challenge is finding 50% neutral grey, because sometimes it's slightly blue, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you look at it and think, actually, that's a road surface. It will be kind of the color that you're looking at, but if it's a sunrise or sunset, it's going to have a warmer tint, so it can put the white balance off. So actually, just from personal experience, I found this is an area where doing a bit of research online and just finding a process how to do it. I'm happy to share a link afterwards of a video for Mike on how I do it. So if it's fairly straightforward, I can do it. If I want to be really precise for a photo maybe that's going through a competition, or if I wanted to print it and I want to get it really spot on, there's a technique that I found, but it uses Photoshop rather than Lightroom. So you just dip into Photoshop and do a quick tweak, and that will tell you what settings you need to use. But I'll send that round to Mike afterwards. So on here, just to give you an example, I've used that technique to find 50% grey in this colour, and actually the most perfect 50% grey is in these 4 little squares, which is within a railing just on the edge of the church up here. This area over here is also slightly 50% grey. So what we're able to do is to come into here and click the colour, and then what you can actually see, if we use this double Y down on the bottom here, this is going to show you kind of before and after. So you can see on the left hand side that was the original, on the right hand side that's with the white balance correctly set. Now again, personal taste, I quite like the before. The sky is slightly bluer, it looks a little bit more moody, but again, exactly down to personal taste. And what it's done here is it's adjusted the temperature and the tint sliders for you based on where you've selected. And what you can then do is, if you then wanted to go and tweak it, you can then go and manually tweak those yourself. If we were clicking this little Y button a bit more, you get the opportunity to do a top and bottom. That's a before and after split horizontally, side by side, or split vertically. So I think that one dramatically shows you the difference between the kind of before and the after side of the photo, just from that one simple click here. And if you were to select a different place on the image, so we're going to select something there, you can see the kind of floating box. Hopefully that's rendering okay on your screens. So you can see the brown there. So if I pick that, you can see that the white balance is just totally off, because I've told it that that brown is actually grey. So what it's done is it's adjusted everything accordingly, and you can see the temperature has come right down to 3700, whereas actually what it really needed to be, and I'm going to be really lucky if I click in there, that was lucky, whereas it wants to be nearly 9,000, 8,900. So using these sliders, the settings, or they're the sort of preset settings, and the eyedropper can allow you to pick and choose what you want the white balance to be, whether you want to be kind of very specific and get it spot on, as real as you possibly can, or whether you want to use that for a little bit of artistic license, and go with just what you think, actually that looks really nice. Whilst we're doing these edits, on the left hand side, just to mention it, while I'm doing all of these, you can see on here the history is building. So if I wanted to go back and just move my mouse over, in the navigator at the top, you can see there's the tungsten one that I did. There it is again. So you can come back here, and if you ever wanted to roll back to the original, you can roll back to the original setting, and then you could roll back to the tungsten one if you wanted to. So you can move backwards and forwards between these. So if you make some changes, and then you've gone 15 clicks down a route, and then gone, actually that's gone a bit odd, and you don't like it, and you want to back out, it's very easy to just come back on here. And if you wanted to, you can right click on here and create a snapshot, and the snapshot will appear in the one up here. So if I create a snapshot and say version 1, and just put that in here, I've got a version 1 in here now. So you could actually take this image and you could process it down one route and say, I'm going to go down a natural route and see what it looks like. And then you could back out to the point where you'd done all of your underlying edits, you'd cleaned up any dust spots, you'd adjusted the white balance, chromatic aberration, you'd done all of those initial things which you would want to do anyway. So you could back out to that point, and then you could go off down a completely different route and process the image. And when you get to the end of each of those processes, you can take a snapshot of that photograph, but processed in different ways, and then you can look at it and you could choose the one that you think is the most appropriate. So I could come to here, I'm just going to turn off the before and after, come back to there, and then if I then did a create snapshot on here, version 2, create, and then what I can do, clicking on these two, I can very quickly go between those two edits. So it's just taking that kind of photograph, if you like, of the edits that you've made at that point. You've still got the history trail here if you want to clean it out. And at the end of the edit, if you ever wanted to do so, you can right click on here and you can clear the history settings before this point or after this point. So if you wanted to just say, right, I've got to this point and I'm never going to go back, you can clear that history because you don't want to, and then you can progress from that point. So again, you can control this. I never do, to be honest. I keep it all in there because sometimes it's nice to go back at a later stage on a photograph and say, how did I do that? And you can go through step by step and look at that. So that's just the history and the snapshots. I'm not really going to go into presets, but just to say they're here. If you want to go down them, you can buy them. Again, personal taste. All they are is some edits that somebody's made, created them as a preset, package them up and sell them. So you can come on here and you can click on these presets and go through what you think. So there's a vivid one, there's a natural one, there's a bright one. So you can just go through them looking at what you think it looks like, and if you find one you like, you just click on it, it will apply it, and then you can use that. So if you want a sort of, well, I was going to say a quick route of doing some editing, you could go down that route, but the challenge I found with them is they don't teach you how to edit. You're just literally clicking on what somebody else has done until you find something that works. And that can actually take quite a long time. And you end up buying more and more and more of them, which makes it even more complex. So personal preference, I don't use them at all unless I make them myself. So presets, snapshots, history, collections is what we looked at before, just making a smart collection. I've made one for tonight, which is just the Ringwood Camera Club demo, and that is a smart collection, which is any photograph within the library that I've flagged with yellow color. So I just went through the library, picked a few that I want, and they automatically appear within that library. And those smart collections can be based on anything you want, whether it's flags, tags, colors, metadata, camera lens, location, whatever you want. So that's how I've got this group of photographs from different folders, all just grouped so that I can work on them. So hopefully that's just a reminder of what's on the left-hand side. The final piece here is at the top we have fit, we have fill, we have 1:1, we have 2:1, and actually if you wanted to change the 2:1, you can pick these little arrows here, you can pick any of these, and that will replace. If I wanted 3:1, I can do that, and then I can go 1:1 or 3:1. So if you found that that was the zoom level that you wanted to go to, you can do, or you could go to 1:4, or even kind of 1:16. So some people, when they're doing certain edits, like to zoom right out because that gives you an overall sort of flavour of what it will look like. But I typically have a 2:1 just in case I need to go in a little bit. Okay. So that's the interface here. So we've looked at white balance. Another trick for certain types of photography for getting the white balance. John mentioned Amazon earlier. If you go into Amazon, or even if it's at your local camera club, look for a grey card. Typically it will have black, white and grey card. I've got one on a lanyard that I take with me in my camera bag. I think it cost me about £5. And if I'm taking photographs and in certain circumstances, and if I remember sometimes, I'll get the card out, just hang it somewhere or just get somebody to hold it, take the photograph, and then I know that and then I'll take another photograph, obviously without it, and I know that if I want to get the white balance right, I can just point on the grey card using the dropper over here, and that will set the white balance correctly. And then when I know what it is, I can then transfer that to the other photograph. So just some sort of little tips there on how to use that. And as I say, I'll send round a video on YouTube for Mike to show you. So looking in the, now we're going to sort of focus on mainly the right hand panel over here this evening. That's going to be the main focus for tonight. All of these areas, these menus, so we looked last time at going into solo mode. And solo mode, just as a refresher, was if I open basic, if I click on tone, what tone does is it closes basic and it just has one menu area, i.e. a solo area open at any one time, which saves you a lot of scrolling. One of the challenges that you can get in Lightroom is actually these bars are quite small, and moving them sort of left and right, some people feel that you can't get quite the level of accuracy that you want. The trick to that is come to get the gap between the picture and the menu bar, and if you just drag that out and widen that, you've obviously made these sliders a lot wider so that the level of accuracy you can get when you're sliding them becomes more precise. So for some photos, if you're being quite particular, you can do it that way. You can also click in the number and type the number that you want, or using the arrow keys on the keyboard, for some of them, you can literally move. That's gone a bit funny. That's moved on to a different photo. You can move them left and right when you've selected in there, just to jump up and down in ones and twos. So if you need to do that, you can do. But the key one is, most of the time, kind of find what's the right width for you, and once you set it, you probably won't need to change it again because the sliders they'll be right. But just for this, I'm going to make it as wide as it can be, because I think that helps for visual. So from a processing point of view, we've got the photo in, we've done the basic edits, we've got the chromatic aberration, removed sharpening, we've set the white balance. So first things first, certainly for me, for landscape, straighten the horizon. So to do the horizon, under the histogram here, and we'll talk about the histogram in a bit more detail in a moment, but here you've got the crop overlay tool. So I'm going to click the tool, and what that's done is that's made a different menu appear here. You've got an overlay on there, which is the normal kind of rule of thirds overlay, and you can then start to rotate, spin, scale, do whatever you want to adjust the crop. So first thing I want to do is to straighten my horizon. So I can either hit auto, and it's going to try and work it out. Works really well with some photos, works abysmally for others, depending on what's in the photograph and what it thinks is the horizon or not. The most quickest way for me is the straighten tool, which you click and you draw a line and you say, for me, that's going to be the horizon, and it's going to do a slight tweak. Obviously, if I said that's the horizon, it's going to spin the image in appropriate way. So again, just to repeat that, so you come onto here, you've got a slider, so you can do this if you need to, do the manual one, or you just come in and draw what you think is the horizon, and then you've got your crop. Okay. The other thing that you have in there, I'm going to go back to there, is the rule of thirds display, so the crosses. You can press O on the keyboard for overlay, and what that's going to do is change the overlay to different sort of compositional types. So there's the golden, I'm looking at Trevor on the camera, the golden mean, meridian, yeah, the golden what's it, yeah. One of those. There's different sort of ratios, so you can literally choose the ones that you want, and when you found the one that kind of matches the image. If you're having something that spins and draws your eye into it, then you probably want something like that. And then you could crop and spin your image to make sure that that works really well for that image. So let's go back to there. So that was O for overlay. You have up here the aspect ratio. So you've got a load of presets in here. You can create your own custom one, which will be saved, and you can refer back to that at a later stage. You have a padlock, which you can lock or unlock. So keeping it locked will mean it will always stay 4:3 or 16:9, whatever you've got it at. But it will just allow you to scale up and scale down, but you can't break that. Whereas if I turn the padlock off, I can then go and do whatever I want to change that. Or you can come in here and say, actually, what I want is a square. So I've created a 1:1, and then you can use the hand tool to move that around and say, actually, that's the photograph that I want. And then you can go away and process and work on that. Now, remembering the history and the snapshots, you could process that image and then as a full image, take a snapshot, and then you could play with different compositions, different crops and aspect ratios, and save each one of those as a different snapshot. And one might get posted to Instagram because it's square, one might go onto Facebook, one might get printed onto the wall, depending on how you want to do that. So again, you can play with these and then just record them and then flick through them to see which ones you like. So I'm just going to reverse that one back out to the main photograph. So all I'm doing here on the keyboard is just doing Control Z just to back out to undo. Okay, so that's really the crop, say crop overlay tool, and what that one does for you. So you can have a play around with that. Next to that, you have spot removal tool. We covered this in the previous video, but just as a reminder, typically we went into 1:1 and we started looking for dust spots. So we had the visualize spots. So there's one straight away. I can, using the wheel on my mouse, I can open that up and down. You can also use the left and right square brackets on your keyboard. You can adjust the feathering, and then you can literally just put that around it, clip that, and if we turn that off and look at the before and the after, just there, you can see it appearing and disappearing. So you can do that. The other way of doing it, so this is using the visualize spots. If you remember, we pressed the home key, which took us to the top left-hand corner. So you can see this in the navigator. So the home takes you to the top left. Using the page down, that's systematically working its way across the photograph, allowing you to look. So there could be one there, because I'm looking for something that looks like a donut shape. Difficult to see in there, but you're probably not going to see it on the photograph anyway. So what I'm really doing is looking for the sky. So there was one there. There's a couple of little dots up here. These could be hot pixels. So again, if we just turn that off, yes, they're hot pixels. So we can come into here and just, they've now gone. So again, very quick way of being able to spot those visually in here. The other way that we looked at was to push up dehaze and start to go through the photograph looking for them, because it makes them kind of stand out. But that's on the other video. So that's this particular tool here. The other, if I just come back out to full size, the other thing you can use it for is you could, I mean, you can use this at any point in the photograph processing. I sometimes use it during, definitely use it at the end, but looking down here at this photograph, that stick really bothers me because the light's on it and actually my eye's being drawn to it. So what you can do with this tool here is if you just get the size right, and draw over it, what that's going to do is to pick an area which it thinks works really well to mask it, and actually that's done a really good job. So we can look at the, if we go to the history, we can look at the before and after. If we turn that off and come right back out, that stick has actually disappeared now. So sometimes it will work really well, other times it won't. So sometimes you might have to do it a couple of times to get it to do it. Or if you've come in and you've got that here, you can actually pick this up and manually move it around in the same area until you find something that works better. Sometimes it needs just a slight adjustment. In that instance, I think it did a really good job first time round to do that. Okay, so I'm just checking my notes there. Yep, so that's the cleanup tool. At the end of the photograph, what I would typically do is to just go around the edge of the photograph looking for, I mean, typically on this one, looking down here for the edges, for anything that kind of just is on the edge that is a distraction. I might also here, I mean, that bright light there I might not want. So again, just using this, you can come in here and just move that. That one's got a bit of a lens flare on it, so that might take a little bit more work. Again, that one there. So quite quickly, you can kind of remove those. There's a little one just there that's catching my eye. So that's gone. And a little couple over here. So all very sort of minor tweaks, but working your way around the edge and just making sure that there's nothing on there that's kind of drawing your eye away from other things. That's all using the spot removal tool. So fixing dust spots, but also minor blemishes or things that you don't want to see. If you want to do anything major, you're into Photoshop territory. This is not really to do edits. This is just adjustments and minor blemishes and minor tweaks. But so removing that stick, it's done a really nice job. But I wouldn't suggest you wanted to start trying to remove the castle off the top of the hill. That would be a Photoshop type piece of work. Next to it, red eye correction. I tend not to use this myself because it's a landscape, but just to show you in here, you've got red eye. So if you had a photograph with red eye, you could pick that, draw around the eyes of the people, and that would remove the red eye. Or I know this is one that Mike, we've spoken about in the past, you can do pet eye, and you would actually draw around the eye itself. Obviously it's unable to find an eye because it's looking for what it could find, but it would put that in, and actually with a pet eye, what it'll do is it'll even put the sort of the little flare in there, or the little glint of light in the eye that you want to try and capture. So it's quite nice at doing those kind of things. So very simple, but literally if it's just an eye on the photo, you just draw around each of the eyes, put that in, and it will do what it needs to do. It's very good, very effective. Next to this, you have graduated filters. So some people, myself included, I like to try and do as much in camera as possible and spend as little time behind the computer as possible. I was a computer programmer for many years, so I spent thousands of hours sat behind them. So I like to be outside now. But if you didn't have filters on your cameras, You can take photographs, you can take multiple photos, and I'll show you how to do a little bit of simple blending in a moment. But with your graduated filter, if you wanted to darken the sky down, you can bring on your filter. You can tell it what direction you want to do. You can adjust the amount of feathering. So a large feather to a very, so this is your kind of soft graduated ND filter to your hard edge. And obviously the closer you get, the harder it is to get level to match the horizon. The trick to that is to use the shift key, and the shift key will get it exactly vertical or horizontal. So I cannot get it off unless I let go of the shift key, and then I can do what I want. So sometimes you might want to have it like that because of you might be putting 2 or 3 of these on a peak of a mountain, and you want one that way, and then actually once you've done that, you then come along and put another one in, and you put another one in that way, and actually what you've got is 2 separate filters, one that way, one that way, and you can do that if you wanted to. So I'm just, and to get rid of those, I've just literally clicked on the dot, hit the delete key on the keyboard, and that's removed them. Okay, so you can put as many of those on there as you want, but in this instance, I'm just going to do a simple filter. I want a reasonable grad on it because I've got the castle, or the church, sorry, on the top here. I'm going to bring this down, and then on here, a new menu has appeared. So this is now going to affect only the mask that I'm creating, and I can boost it, or I can bring the exposure down. So if I brought the exposure down, let's just say 1 stop, and what I might want to do is, it's automatically put those highlights in itself. So you can start to play around here. Might want to make it feel a bit moody, and so you just kind of mess around to your heart's content until you've got what you want. With the sliders, when you've moved them, if you want to put them back to where they were, if you double click on the text, it will take them straight back to the middle. So save you sliding it up and down manually. If you want it to go back to the default place, you can play with this one here. And what I tend to do is to kind of push them. We touched on this previously, and then pull them back. So if you were to obviously do the exposure, way overexposed, and then you could bring this down, looking until you go, okay, that kind of feels right, and actually I've gone under rather than over, so I'm making my adjustment based on the image rather than looking at a number and a slider. So that's one way of doing it. And just referencing the histogram while we've got this open, in the histogram you have got, obviously this is the, as you all probably know, representation of your blacks, your shadows. So if you look here where you can see ISO 400, sorry, that's going to change. So when I move my mouse over the histogram, that's telling me that's the blacks, that's the shadows, and you can see the sort of light grey area appearing. That's your exposure, that's your highlights, and that's your whites. So each of those highlighted areas represents exposure, highlights, shadows, blacks and white sliders. So if I started to do the exposure, that's moving the middle of the histogram around. If I do the highlights, I'm moving this end up here, I'm moving this section here around. If I wanted to do the far end and I wanted to bring that back, I can use the whites and you can see that it's moving that end. Now obviously it's squashing everything up, because so you can see the whole histogram moving, but that's because I'm looking at the white end, which is this particular section here. And all I'm trying to do in this instance, you can see here, I've got a red triangle up here, and if I move my mouse over it, you can see where it's blowing on the image, it's gone red. So this section here, when you move your mouse over, and if I click it, they will stay on permanently. So I've done it on the blacks, and you can see the blacks go blue. So just down here, if I was to bring the blacks down even more, you can start to see where it's losing all detail in the blacks. Or if I was to start to push the whites up, I'm losing more and more detail because I'm clipping the highlights on the right hand end of the histogram, and this is the representation of that to allow you to check it. So you can turn these little triangles on and off just by clicking them, but the note is that when you start to clip, you will start to see it with a red up here telling you that there's an issue. But I always just kind of mouse over there and just have a look, or just turn them on while you're doing your editing, just to make sure that you're keeping your histogram within the dynamic range of the camera and you're not sort of going over it. So this, what we're doing here is we were looking at the graduated filter. All of these sliders, plus a couple of extra, the moi, if that's how you pronounce it, and the defringe, they are within this, they're not within the normal area. And all of these are going to relate to this area you can see on here. Again, if we use the O for overlay, you'll get that red overlay, and you can see the area that it's impacting. So the red area at the top here, there is a button somewhere, I forget what it is, but if you wanted to change that from red to green or to another color, you can do. And so the shortcut menu that I gave you links to last time, I'm just looking to see whether it's on my shortcut list up here. It's not, because I don't use it anymore. No. You can change it to a different color. If your image was predominantly red and you couldn't see that, you can change that to green, and that would help you to do that. And moving here, you can see if I'm sliding this up and down, that feathering has gone really hard, the transition from the red to normal, whereas if I bring it right down here, this is your really sort of soft graduated filter. You can put multiple filters on, and all of these edits that you're doing on here are non-destructive. So you can come back to them, you can remove them, you can tweak them at a later stage. If you look at the photograph and 2 days later you come back and go, actually, I think I overcooked it, or I maybe need to change this slightly, you can come back into these filters. So you could come back to that later, click on that here, click on that one there, and then say, actually, I just wanted to do that, and I just wanted to move that up so that the impact on the church is slightly less. And maybe I'm happier with that because that doesn't feel like it's got a line through it. If that was the top of a mountain and you were trying to do you see somewhere there's a dark line across it, and you can see that it's a kind of either the filter on the camera or the filter post-process has caused a dark line on there. So that's the graduated filter. So you can use all of these sliders, which I'll talk about some of them a little bit more in detail in a moment. You can do all of those on a graduated filter edit, and you can put multiple ones on there to suit your need. Some of these tools is just worth touching on, really. Some of the tools are global, some of the tools are local. So the spot removal, the red eye, and these are really your local tools. So if you want to start modifying just this area here or just this area over here, that's going to be a local edit using some of these tools. If you start using these main tools and sliders down here, that's a global edit. So when I adjust the contrast or the exposure, that's doing the whole photograph. Whereas if I wanted to adjust just the contrast or exposure of just the clouds, then I would use a local edit and use either a radial or a brush or a graduated filter just to focus the edit on that local area. Radial filter, Similar to the graduated, this one is going to create this here. So you can move that around, you can scale it, you can rotate it, you can do whatever you kind of need. You can do exactly the same set of things on here, so you can adjust various different custom settings and all of these sliders. So you can start to adjust. You can see there in the navigator in the top left hand corner what it's doing. So in this one it's doing some particularly nasty burning, so I've kind of cranked the exposure up. But if you wanted to put a very subtle vignette on it, but you didn't want just it to be kind of the usual one where all of the edges are darkened, you wanted it actually to be off here, I can turn off the overlay and actually I can start to do this. And what it's just doing very subtly is it's darkening those edges down. And it's drawing the focus of the eye onto there, and you could kind of spin that, move that in that instance. Do that on there. And if you wanted to invert it, you've got an invert here. So you're darkening the outside or you're darkening the inside. So you can just flick that on and off, and you can adjust the feather to whether you want it really hard or really soft feathered edge. And then you can turn that off, and there you've brightened that area there very subtly. You could add a little bit of color into it if you wanted to, just to emphasize the sun on the side of the hill in the church, without affecting any of this edge here. And actually, if we kind of come back to the before and the after, so you can just see very kind of subtle soft edit there, by playing around with that on there. The brush tool, I'm just going to reset this back to, let's go back to that one there before I destroy the image. And then the final one is the brush tool. So the brush, again, you can adjust the, I'm just going to hide this menu because this one's got a particularly long menu. So here, you've got all the same edits that you've got. You've got color, you've got multiple brushes you can use, you've got the feathering, you've got the size of the brush, which you can adjust with the wheel of your mouse. You've got some auto masking, which you can turn on and off. So if you're going around something, it will try and mask up to it as accurate as it can. So you could try and go around the edge of that church. And you've also got some luminosity and color masking features in here. So if I wanted to do an adjustment to the cloud, just as an example, I could turn this up quite heavily. I'm going to just brush that on. I'm going to turn on my overlay so we can see where I'm kind of masking. And I've done a very crude kind of mask on the sky. Now, obviously that's hit the cloud, it's hit the hills, and I don't particularly want to do that. So down here, you've got mask. There's loads of videos on this in quite detail online, so we're not going to be able to cover it in lots of details, but it's really useful for every type of photography, especially with difficult shapes. So what you can do is you can come in here, you can choose the luminance, and then what you've now got is a couple of sliders, range and smoothness. Range is your blacks to your highlights, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say I don't want to touch my shadows, so I'm going to start to move this up, and if you keep your eye on the church, what you'll start to see is the effect will start to wash off the church and focus more on the sky and less on the church. And you can adjust the smoothness, so that's the sort of transition, the feathering if you like. And then what we could say is what we want to do. In this instance, I want to increase the saturation of the sky. So what I can do is I can punch those clouds up in there, but it won't have done anything on here. So just play around with there's the mask on and off. So play around with the luminance. You can do it based on color. So if you had different contrasting colors, a green to a black or something, and you wanted to pick the green, you could do that for grass or things like that. Or if you want to do it on luminance, so brightness, transition from the land to the sky, again, this will help you to do that. So that's the brush, and as I say, with the overlay, that'll show you what you're actually working on. So if we just take that off as an example, I could actually brush in here and I've got my mask off. So what I'm going to do is just go into luminance. I'm going to slide that up because all I want to pick up is the highlights. So I'm going to go up into the 90s. I'm going to turn off O for overlay. And then what I'm actually going to do is to maybe just increase the exposure, maybe by 1 stop, and increase the saturation slightly. And that I'm going to be happy with. And then what that's actually done is, hopefully we can see difference, very subtle, you might not be able to see it, but I've actually just boosted it on these highlighted edges of the hill there to just emphasize the sunset. So that's the brush. So you can brush that on any area or on anything, and using any of the sliders just to start to tweak particular areas that you want to do. So those are mainly local adjustments that you can do on here. Into the basic panel, we've obviously covered profile. You have black and white. So if you want a black and white image, you can go into there and then again start using sliders. Some of them obviously disappear because they're not relevant in a black and white world. But we'll switch back to color for this one. Then you've got all of your normal sliders, contrast, exposure, obviously the different areas of the histogram, which as I'm moving up and down here, you can see them in the histogram highlighting. So if you're looking at your histogram and saying, actually, that's a little bit in there, you can actually click on the histogram itself if you want, and you can just slightly move to the right, and you can see actually that's moving the black slider. Or you can, when you move over here, you can see it says blacks. You could then go and click on the black slider itself, and you can see that I'm just bringing that in from the right-hand edge. And again, with the over here, I'm looking at the whites, so I can just bring that in again there, just slightly if I wanted to. Just keeping away from the kind of clipping. You can see the color changing to tell you that you're right on the edge, and now you've gone over. Okay, and then texture, clarity, dehaze, vibrance, and the saturation. So in here, if we wanted to start, if we come into here, if we're looking at the texture, we can then start to bring this up. Some of it can look quite crunchy. Again, depending on what you're looking at, obviously soften it right down. Very artistic, but sometimes in here, things like there's an effect called the Orton effect, which a lot of landscape photographers, and I believe other styles of photography, can use it in post-processing, where you give it this ethereal kind of soft effect. You can use a simple way of doing it is just to start using some of these sliders just to give you that kind of nice, soft, ethereal glow. Clarity, slightly different slider. in here. So some of them are focusing on the mid-tones and basically a contrast. Dehaze. So if you wanted to, if it was a little bit misty, or you want to make it feel slightly misty, you can bring this up. When you bring this up, you probably want to change the color temperature to bring that back to a bit more realistic. Or if it was a little bit hazy and you wanted to remove some of it, maybe to highlight some hills that were in the distance that were just kind of hidden a little bit, very subtly you can start to slide that and you can see what it's doing. And again, this is a global adjustment to the whole image now, so not necessarily what you would do, but you could do this with a brush or with a graduated filter just over the mountains in the distance and just take a little bit of haze off. From experience, I found less is more, so a small tweak and then review rather than a great big one, and then you do 15 different large slides, and when you actually go and look at the before and after, it's an enormous change. But actually sometimes a very small change and you make a few of them, and then when you actually come back and look at the before and after, either using the history or you can use the / key on your keyboard just very quickly to allow you to look at a before and after. Or you can use obviously these before and after just to have a look and go, okay, those small changes have actually made a huge difference to the overall edit. So yeah, less is more in some of these sliders, and as I say, it's really easy to come back and just adjust them again if you want a little bit more later on. So that's really the basic panel.
We're getting close to half time now, and if
okay,
you want to take a break,
yeah, okay.
Or if you want to finish this bit.
Yeah, one little thing, and then I've kind of finished the whole section.
Yeah, that's fine.
So a couple of minutes. So one other area, so different photograph just for a change. So this is really wide angle photo down. I think this was Bournemouth, one of the piers down. I'm not sure which one it is now. First time I've been there. So I've gone into here just to see what it was. If I press I for information, I can come on here and I can see the image info. If I press that again, I can see that that was at f16 on a 16mm lens. So again, quite wide angle, and just pressing I toggles through those. But the reason just for showing this image here is because it's quite wide angle, the legs on this are not vertical. Obviously, those are kind of tapering in one way and these are tapering in the other way. So that could be masts on a boat. It could be legs on here. It may be the effect that you want. And that's absolutely fine. If you're looking down the middle of a road and the buildings on each side are starting to lean out, the way you can resolve this if you want to, and you really need to think about this before you're taking the picture, because you are going to lose some of the image and you can lose significant chunks of it, is down here you have the transform. And not going to go into this in tons of detail. You can have a play with this yourself, but the one I tend to use when I do use it is this little top left hand here, which you click this, and then you're able to draw lines on the image. So I'm going to draw roughly down that leg there, and then I'm going to pick one of these legs over here, and I'm going to kind of draw that leg there. And now what that's done is that's transformed or warped the image to straighten those legs, and I can just click in there and that's kept it. And then using the crop tool, what I could then do is to come into here, find the crop that I want, and then that might be the image that I actually want to start working on. So again, artistic license. Do you want to crop it and make it so that it kind of works nicely with the eye, or do you want it to warp out? So that's all I'm really going to cover on the transform tool, transform thing here. You can start messing around with all sorts of different things in here, vertical and spinning things, and start doing really strange warps, which I've never really needed to do in the style that I do, but that's the area I would tend to use it. And as a rule of thumb, the one thing the tips that I've had from online and people I've spoken to about it is when you're, if I go back to here, when you're doing those, typically if that's leaning in by a certain amount, on the other side, it kind of wants to lean in about the same amount. It doesn't want to go in like that. It wants to roughly balance what you've got. Typically, I'm following the legs on the thing as a rule of thumb, and it'll work out quite well. Control Z puts me back to where I was. Okay.
Very good. Excellent, thank you.
Alcohol break. So if I went across into Photoshop here.
Yeah.
So I hope, can you still see Photoshop?
Yeah, I can see selective tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
So I'm just moving some windows around.
Yeah.
So in Photoshop, obviously same thing here. I use a tool up here, or a couple of tools, Lumenzia. So this is for luminosity masking.
Crikey.
Which is, if I've done some bracketed shots, or I want to do something very specific and I want to target the lighter areas of the photo and I want to add contrast, rather than having to go in and draw magnetic little loops and spend a lot of time, and especially if you're doing things on landscape where you've got a tree that's crossing the horizon and I want to modify the clouds, with Lumenzia and luminosity masking, what you can do is actually come in here and do a luminosity, and actually the edit I'm going to make is going to affect the whiter areas, and the black areas are going to be ignored. So very quickly I can come in here and choose the edit I want. Then I can adjust that with the layers and the levels, and then I can come into here and say, actually I want this to be a contrast or a levels or a curve or a brightness contrast layer. So I can do a non-destructive edit, but using a luminosity mask, I can very quickly isolate the area that I want. So if that was the bright sky of a sunset with a silhouetted tree, I could pick all the sky out just with a couple of clicks of a button, using luminosity masking. So I tend to use it for with those kind of tools. I've got another one called Raya Pro, which has got similar types of things in here. So you've got some kind of presets and some built-in sharpening, and you can do the Orton effect and all sorts of quick blend, so blending multiple bracketed exposures, dodging and burning. So you can do all sorts of clever things in here. And I mean, I like this Raya Pro one because it's got tutorial, so it'll take you through exactly what all of these buttons do.
So your home screen is the screen that you're looking at now bears absolutely no resemblance to my own screen. Are they all your own sort of presets?
They're plugins, aren't they?
These are plugins.
Yeah.
So these are purchased. So Lumenzia and Raya Pro, and I purchased it. Lumenzia, I think, is about $30. So if you're going into Photoshop and you're starting to do a lot of edits where you're struggling to isolate certain areas, it's definitely a tool to look at. It has a reputation, luminosity masking, for being really complicated, and to be fair, it can be if you're really kind of pushing it. But actually, just from a simple this tool, I just find it's really quite self-explanatory.
So what are you looking at now?
So can you see the top right-hand corner? This.
What's that?
So this is Lumenzia. So this is a plugin.
Oh, I see.
So when you buy it, you just follow the install instructions, and it embeds itself within in Photoshop. So you can't do that kind of thing with some plugins in Lightroom. Nick collections you can, but that's because you're pushing something out to another tool that kind of runs in its own world,
Yeah.
whereas these are plugins into Photoshop. So that's where I tend to use Photoshop. The other one that I would typically do, so if I just do this in here, a lot of mine I tend to put a white border around them.
Yes.
So in here I would just come into the canvas size.
Yes.
And in here I would say I want to, I don't know,
Like a stroke.
2 centimeter white border around the edge,
Yeah.
and then obviously just create a layer, drop it behind it, get white, get my bucket, drop the white into there, and that would give me my white border, which I would then obviously export that out to my JPEG or whatever. Putting my signature on it, I can put my signature on it from Lightroom really easy, but if I've put a border on it and various things like that, I would tend to do some of those finishes in Photoshop. But it tends to be, like you say, John, do most of it in Lightroom, and then anything where you want to spend that little extra bit of time and just push it that little bit further because you're going to do something special with the photograph, I would do some things into Photoshop.
Okay, thanks very much.
Let's go back through my notes. So one thing we didn't really touch on, which is in the effects panel down here, is noise. So let's just have a look in here. So sorry, in the detail panel. So we talked about sharpening and reducing sharpening. That's not to say that you can't sharpen in here, but what you tend to do is to do the sharpening yourself rather than just allow Lightroom to do it for you. So in the detail panel, you've got 3 areas, if you like. There's the sharpening section at the top, then you've got noise reduction broken into luminance and color. The payoffs with the noise reduction are that from a luminance point of view, you remove noise, but the impact will be you'll lose sharpness. So you've got to get the balance between the two. Color, if you're removing color noise, that's going to impact the saturation. So again, you've got to play the balance between those. So sometimes where I talked earlier on about going out to something like a 16:1 or even a 1:8, or just zooming out, when you're doing some of these edits, you might want to be zoomed out because it'll give you a better understanding of what impact it's having to the photograph. And in other instances with the sharpening, on the sharpening side, what you want to be is at least 1:1. And you can see here with the sharpening, there's an exclamation mark up here, and it's telling you that you want to be at 100% or larger when sharpening so that you can actually see what you're doing. So that's what that little warning symbol is there. So you'd come up and you'd hit your 1:1. That symbol has now disappeared because you're at the right scale to allow you to do the sharpening. Now, from a sharpening point of view, see the way sharpening is working, and you can adjust the radius and the detail level. And again, that's personal preference and will depend on the image. So the radius is kind of the feathering, if you like, at the edge. And you can crank this up and down, and hopefully you can see, I mean, if I go there, it's quite soft. And as I bring this up, it's starting to, if you're looking at the stone here on the side of the pier, hopefully you can see it's going from a kind of soft to quite grungy there, where I've over cranked it. But I've done that hopefully so that you can see it. The way that you can do this, because what you've also is probably not the best photo to show this. Let me just pick. Yes. There. Okay, so this one here, we can see we've got some noise in the sky because this is an under one bracketed shot and it's under, so you can see all the kind of noise in here in the image itself. So if I was wanting to sharpen this, I can go into my 1:1, click on there, and then I can kind of start to sharpen it. But this is doing a global sharpen. So this is sharpening the entire image. And I don't want to do that. So what I can do is I can come out and using the Alt key on the keyboard, so to the left of your spacebar, I think on a Mac it's Option. Not a Mac expert, so apologies, but I think it's the Option key.
Yeah,
If you press that, you can see that the wording is changing just when I'm pushing the key. So sharpening is going reset sharpening. And then if I slide this slider, you can see the masking changing. Now, white reveals, black conceals. So what that means is it's going to adjust what's white and it will ignore what's black. So now when I'm sharpening, I don't want to be sharpening all of the noise in the sky because it's just going to make it harder to remove later. And when I'm removing noise, I'm going to be adjusting the sharpness. I'm going to end up with a very soft image. So again, it's the balance between it, but it's bringing this up here. Okay, I'm getting a nice edge around the castle. Or the church, sorry, a little bit in the clouds, but not up here. So again, holding the Alt key down and clicking the button there, you can see what you're going to sharpen. And then I can start to bring this up. But what I'm not doing is, if I turn this down, it's difficult to see, I'm probably on the screens, but I'm not affecting all of this up here because I'm just affecting. Sorry, I clicked the wrong button there, click that. So you're controlling what you're sharpening and what you're not sharpening. So this is the mask. And then again, once you've got that, you can adjust the detail and the radius and see what impact that has on the sharpening till you get it to your taste and it's not looking kind of overly cooked. Once you've done that, you can then come in here and you can look at here. So we've got noise. So looking at this, I've definitely got some color noise in here. So I'm just going to start to, so you can see that's just starting to remove some of the color noise. And then I can bring this up here. Hopefully you can see that's starting to kind of disappear. And you're looking for the balance between not making it too soft and retaining the sharpness. So it's the balance between all of those and making sure. So in there, if I was going to print that, if I look at, we touched on this whilst people were grabbing a drink, but on the top of all of these, there is a little square up here. And if I click that on and off, what that's doing is turning on and off the adjustments we've made just within that panel. So you can do it like I was doing earlier on the history, and I've tried to do things in different ways during this just to give you an example. But I can look at that and see what the before and the after is. Or again, you can use your before and after. So looking at it there, seeing the side by side. You can see the difference that's made. So that's the detail panel, sharpening, push it across, Alt key, and while the Alt key is held, pick the masking and slide that down. It's really good when you start to do portrait type photography, when you're wanting to pick out kind of the details, but you don't want it to sharpen up any imperfections in the skin and things like that. You still want to keep them to have that nice soft feel. Lots of different types. Wildlife photography, if you're wanting to sharpen up. I think, John, you took some photos the other day at the Beginners Club of the starling. So if you'd got some soft bokeh in the background and you didn't want to do anything to that, but you wanted to sharpen up the feathers on the bird, you could use this masking to isolate it to the bird, and then start to just focus on the feathers themselves. So that would really work nicely in there, because the background would typically be lighter than the bird itself. And then playing with those. So have a play around with that area, the sharpening side, and see how you get on with there. But it's very powerful. I do some of mine in Photoshop. If I was going to print it, and I mean behind me on just over my, I don't know when you're looking at my left, up there, that's about 3 feet by 2 feet, that photo. So I did a little bit more processing on that one in Photoshop than I would normally do, just because I was going to print it that bit bigger. So yeah, so that's detail, noise reduction, covered that there. Just going through my tick list, covered all of that. Okay, so I'm going to reset that back. So a couple of other really nice features in Lightroom. I love these. I spent way too much time using them when I started. So looking at the bottom here, we've got a lot of photographs which I've purposely put in. Just looking at here, let's just make sure all of these are reset. Yeah, okay. So I've taken bracketed shots of the church. So kind of normal exposure, underexposed, and overexposed. I did one stop. Normally I would use 2 stops. Just it's sunset. I wanted to make sure I captured the colour. I was there on holiday. I didn't want to miss it, so I will typically take a bracketed set. If I can get away with just 1 shot, which from the dynamic range, there's a little bit of burnt out blacks there, which I'm not too worried about for the detail there, but I've got the highlights in there, so I know that that color is there and I can recover that if I need to, using sliders and brushes and graduated filters, etc. So I can bring that color back in. I've not lost it. But if you were taking a photograph with a really big dynamic range and your camera just wouldn't capture it, you can take bracketed shots, and there are ways as well of doing it, kind of doing this same process with a single photograph, but that's another topic for another day. But what you can do in Lightroom is you can click the first photograph, click the final photograph, so I'm picking 3. It could be 7, could be 9, depending on what your camera can take. And with those connected or selected, sorry, I can right click on here, or you can access it from the top menu up here. But the right click is the fastest. And here you've got photo merge and you've got HDR, high dynamic range. So what that's going to do, and I'm hoping you can see that HDR preview.
Yes, got that.
See that window? Okay. So what that's now done is that's basically blended all of those 3 images together to create a high dynamic range photograph. So it's brought in all the lights and all the shadows to give you basically all of the information into that one photograph. Now, because I took it on a tripod with the camera stable, nothing was moving, or very little was moving, then that works really well. If you had wind and grass was blowing in the photograph and aeroplanes flying around, cars moving, it kind of wouldn't work. So what this has done is this brought these 3 in together, and auto align does what it says on the tin. It's just going to make sure that all of them are aligned. So if there was a tiniest little bit of movement, it would be able to sort that out for you. And you have auto settings on and off. So that's basically all of the information. So that's all the data that the camera has captured as a raw photograph that you can then work on and edit. This auto settings button here is exactly the same. If you remember, in the basic panel there was an auto button and you clicked it and the camera went, I think it should look like this, and it adjusts the highlights and contrast and exposure and all of that. Turning that on is just doing what that auto button is doing, and that's giving you a representation of what it thinks the photograph can look like. You can then go in afterwards and you can tweak it, and I'll show you that in a moment.
John's just asked if that's 2 stops between images.
Mine are 1 stop between each. Typically, I always used to do 1 stop because my first camera I started with was probably it'd be nearly 15 years old now, so it didn't have a particularly good dynamic range. I've now got a 5D Mark III, which has a lot better dynamic range, and without thinking, I've always just stuck to 1 stop. But actually, the dynamic range of the 5D is fine with 1 stop. So I now have started pushing that to 2 stops between each shot, so that I can go into the really dark shadows and I can pick up the really bright highlights on really contrasty shots. So, I mean, with most cameras nowadays, even probably iPhones and things like that, the dynamic range of them is really good, whereas the older ones, it wasn't so much. So 2 stops typically as a minimum between bracketed shots is where I would go. What it's also doing here is you've got deghost amount. So this is to do with movement. So the only thing that's really moving here, it was a very still evening, it's obviously on a tripod, the only thing that's going to be moving are the clouds. So if I bring on low, and hopefully I picked the right images, so this is going to build a quick preview, and what this should do is highlight to you where it's picked up a slight bit of movement. So you should there, so you can see some red areas appeared on the screen. So up here, in the middle here, and over on the right hand side here. So those are areas where it's saying between the 3 blended shots there is a slight bit of movement in those particular areas in the cloud. If I went to medium, those areas are going to get bigger because it's becoming more sensitive to movement. And if I went to high, pretty much all of the sky is going to go red, I would guess. There we go. So based around those movement. Now, this particular photograph, I can quite happily do none because you're not going to pick it up. It's going to blend the 2, and because it's the clouds, you're not really going to notice that amount of difference. If it was a building or something, a mast on a boat or something like that, then yes, you'd see that a bit more. If it was a boat moving in the water, you'd have to be a little bit more careful with that. But that's what this is doing here, allowing you just to see how much movement, and it will try and correct it depending on which one of these you select, and it will work okay with some and not very well with others. And then the final piece here is create stack. What that's going to do is that's going to stack all of those photographs together in Lightroom as a group or a stack. So you know that I originally had 3. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say merge. And what that's doing, if you watch the bottom down here, you can see these 3 highlighted. You'll see in a few seconds there's a 4th one appeared. And if we go, when it's finished doing its thing, oh, because I've got a window. So over here now, I've got a 4th image, and these are actually grouped together. So if I was to come back into the library module, and look at these images, when you see them, you can expand and contract the stack so that you can you'll see one image, which would typically be this new one. And if I do you can see that it's got the same image name, but it's put on the end of it -HDR. So it's created you a fourth image, which is a blend of those three together, giving you a base image which you can then go and work on. And you know that you've got the details of in the shadows and all of the information in the highlights that you can then go and work with. So when HDR had a bit of a bad rap, because you used to look at some images and they were definitely HDR, they looked a little bit strange, and for a while everybody went, wow, that looks fantastic, me included. I used to see some nice holiday shots and think, how did they do that? But actually this type of HDR in Lightroom or also in Photoshop can give you, basically bring all of the information into the image to give you the best start, if you like, whether you've done the auto settings or not. So if we look in here now, you can see there's the auto, the adjustments that it's made, because it thinks that's the right thing to do. So it's blended the three, got all the data in, and then changed all of those. If you then suddenly said, actually, I want to do this to it, and you want to bring those up or bring those down, again, you can go and start to tweak it, but you've got all of that extra data in there. So that's HDR for you. So, and I say that could be 3 images, 5, 9, whatever your camera does. The other tool in there is panoramas. If you like doing panoramas, I love panoramas. I'm going to spend more money one day on some nice bits of kit to allow me to do them better. But this was a set of shots, just a simple one, down in Dartmoor. Basically on a tripod, did all the bits that I needed to do to get it level, and when you twist the camera it stays level, and make sure that as you twist it, it's not going to blow out in one area and underexposed in one and overexposed in another. So spend quite a bit of time setting it all up, and I took this kind of set of photographs. What you can then do in Lightroom, you can exactly the same process, highlight that whole range of images and right click and photo merge, exactly the same process, and here you've got panorama. And what that's going to do is going to stitch all of those photos together. Now I'll touch on it. It's not one that I've even attempted to do yet, but if you were doing a panorama with bracketed shots, which you wanted to merge together to create a high dynamic range photos and then stitch them into a panorama, you've got this bottom option there. I've never attempted it, scares the life out of me. It's even setting it up. I've never really even tried to attempt it, but you can do. So if you wanted to go down that route, you can be quite clever or creative. So in here, we're going to go into panorama. Hopefully you can see that merge preview again.
Yep. Yeah,
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. That's now stitched all of those images together to give you that one panorama. There's all sorts of tricks to it. I'm no expert in doing this. It's an area that fascinates me, and I'm desperate to learn more about it when I get the chance to do it.
Yeah, Trevor's just said that he finds it quite useful to do a sort of thumbs up at the beginning and end. So you've got a shot that you take at the beginning and end.
Yes.
Just to mark that.
Yeah, no, I've seen that on a few videos, because yeah, when you come back and you've got loads and loads of shots, you're like, which one's where's the start, where's the end? And yes, no, thank you. So that's blending those. The blend will be as successful as the photographs that you've taken. So if you haven't got your camera leveled, if you haven't done enough overlaps, so typically 50 to 30%, 30% seems to be about the right overlap that you need between the photos. That will then create you a here, and actually when you're looking at it, you can't see any joins in there at all. And it will be as successful as the photo. I've done some when I was in Iceland. My wife took me there for my 50th with my new camera, and I took some lovely ones, but what I hadn't thought about was the water. Of course, trying to stitch waves when I should have done a long exposure, but then you've got the movement of the clouds, and it all gets quite difficult. So again, it's quite a specialist area, but certainly things like this in Dartmoor and other places, whether it's 2 or 3 images, will give you that effect. What this is doing here, create stack, again, all it's doing is grouping all of those images together into a stack, so that in the Lightroom library module, you can expand and contract that stack, so that in the library module, you see one image. When you click on it, they will all expand out, and you can see all 27 images which you use to create that one photograph. And you can tell it which photograph within the stack to show within the library module, so that you look at it and you're seeing the final one, not a tiny little slice of it. So the whole stacking area is an interesting area, and when we come out of this at the end, I'll show you that in the Lightroom library module. Here it's doing crop, so auto cropping. So see here, you can see the edges where it's blended it all together. So that's just adjusted that, and again the settings, that's the normal. That's with the auto adjustment. So that's what it thinks it probably should look like, or did look like. And again, you can then come in and tweak that. So this is an example where I talked about the dehaze slider. So we could use that later on. You've got a couple of spherical, cylindrical, or perspective blend types. So some of these work better than others. So if we just look out on here, those two don't really seem to do much. So it's just personal taste. Look at them and see which one tends to work the best for you. Spherical seems to work fairly consistently all of the time. And you've even got fill edges, which what that's going to do is fill in. So rather than cropping, it's invented pixels to go in the edge to fill the gaps. So rather than cutting them off, we've actually used a Photoshop tool which now lives in Lightroom, which forget what they call it now in Photoshop. It's gone out of my head. Content aware fill, I think it is, and it has invented it. So I know up in the top corner up here, if I take those edges out, it's done a pretty good job of inventing some pixels for me for that particular image, but it's meant I've kept it as big as I possibly can. So really, really powerful. Panoramic is a whole, HDR and panoramic is a whole kind of world of its own. I particularly like the HDR side, purely from getting the high levels of data in the photograph to give you the best start, and also panorama, because I really like big open landscape type photography. So these two areas are interesting for me. But have a play with them, don't be afraid of them, and that's where they are. So on that one, I'm literally going to hit merge, and that will do exactly the same thing. We'll add in a second at the bottom there, you'll get another image will appear, and they'll all be grouped together into one big stack, and you'll have an enormous image. Now, each of these individual images is about, it's a 22 megapixel camera, so not a monster. But again, when you combine all of those together, either HDR or as panorama, you can be making photographs which are 4 feet wide. When printed at 1:1, and file size, they can get quite scary. Then you lob them into Lightroom and Photoshop and start putting layers in. You can quite quickly end up with some enormous file sizes. So it's definitely something to be aware of when you're doing this, especially if you're doing a lot of it, because performance of the computer. I mean, I got my computer from John Lewis. It's not a monster, but I've put a lot of RAM into it, and it's an i7, so it can handle it reasonably well. But you can see this up in the top left corner. It's just over 50%, 60% now, just building the panorama. So it's literally stitching all of those together for us in the background. Now it can still carry on working while it's doing all of that, and eventually another photograph's going to appear here. So this is quite an extreme example. I wouldn't normally take that many shots, but I thought it's a good example just so that you can see what it can do. So any questions there on HDR or panorama stitching? Okay.
I'll unmute everyone so they can, if anyone wants to chip in.
Yeah, Andy.
Yep.
It's John here again. When you're taking each, there's 9 separate images. Are you taking them? I think I answered my own question. I think, are you taking them in landscape or portrait? You're taking them in portrait, aren't you?
Yeah, so I've taken them in, I mean, I used to take them in landscape, but actually when I've researched it, the best way of doing it is to do them in portrait, because when you stitch them all together, you obviously get a deeper file rather than a very thin, long letterbox type effect. It gives you more data, and when you're going to crop the top and the bottom off the images as well, landscape, you can end up with a very thin photograph. So yeah, spinning the camera around, one of the best and simplest investments I made for this was an L bracket. So that I can literally flip the camera between landscape and portrait in seconds without having to mess around with anything. Once I've got it level and on the tripod and the head and everything, I can literally switch it and spin it and take photographs without having to adjust anything. Because that can take a lot of time getting it set up, and then you suddenly realize, oh, I've still got it in landscape, and you've got to change it. So yeah, Arca Swiss L bracket is, if you're doing this type of thing, or a lot of photography, it's well worth looking in. They're well worth looking into if you do a lot of tripod work.
Yeah, you can get a nice little one called Ellie, but it's made by Three Legged Thing.
Yes, yep.
They do quite a reasonably priced L brackets for all sorts of different cameras. There is a universal one which I've got. It's very useful, and as Andy says, you can just flip it from landscape to portrait, because it's definitely best to do panoramas with portrait images. Much easier. Unless you try and vertical panoramas, in which case you do landscape, but that's a whole other field. But you will also need a much bigger hard drive if you start getting into this.
Yeah,
and you'll start seeing PSB files in Photoshop, which is over 2 gigabytes.
Yeah, and if you do HDR panoramas, you can come back with sort of 60 photographs, which are going to make one image. You need some serious power and
serious
storage.
gigabytes of image size.
Yeah, and don't drink alcohol while you're processing them, because you'll be completely plastered before you've even finished.
Fun stuff, though, panoramas.
Yeah, no, it is really. I find it fascinating. And
I've done quite a few over the years.
Yeah, I've got a few in the house which we've had framed, and one in the bedroom above the bed, one in the lounge. I think the biggest one's about 4 feet wide. But they're really nice. When they don't always come out right, and I try and learn from it. But when they do come out right, they look really great.
I've had a few disasters, but yes, they are amazing when you get them right.
Yeah, you just have to learn from them, because you spend so much time setting them up and taking them, and you come back and you go, oh, I didn't do that.
Trick I've found is if you're out and about and you haven't got your tripod with you, just shoot as wide as you can get away with, and then literally just turn on the spot. You'll find you'll lose quite a bit top and bottom, but if you shot wide angle enough, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You can still do them if you don't have a tripod and think, oh, that'd look really good as a landscape shot, sort of a panoramic shot.
Yeah, I went on a course with a guy, local guy called Daniel Reetham, or Danny Reetham. Really good photographer, really nice guy. I'd definitely recommend. He's got a lovely website. Some of the stuff that he does, and he does workshops. It's not his day job. He just has a passion for it. But he's like the guy we had, or I think the guy that's coming to one of our sessions next. He does a lot of landscape photography with long lens, to telephoto. 300, 400 mil landscape photography. When I went on his course and he started talking to me about it, and we talked about pano, he said, "Oh, I'll get your long lens on," and I thought he'd just lost the plot. And the best one I've got, which is above my bed in our bedroom, that was done with my 300 mil lens. It's stitched perfectly because you've not got any lens distortion to worry about, which you would have with a real wide angle lens.
Yeah.
So they kind of start to stitch. So there's all sorts of things to consider, but yeah, it's a whole new world.
It is.
So anyway, that's still busy stitching. So I'm gonna.
Looks like you've got one at the bottom there, though.
Yeah. Oh, it's finishing. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
So yeah, there we go. So there's your final. Here's all your auto settings. So okay, now we can start to mess around with all of the highlights and shadows and etc. Image wise, size, what have we got? I mean, you can see there 29,623 pixels wide, so it's a bit of a monster. And yeah, I mean, you can kind of, when you start to look at the file size and things like that as well, but when you scale that down and you see how many inches it is and all this kind of stuff, it
is it best to edit on the final image, or start with the first one and edit that and then synchronize across the screen?
Very, very good question. There's different trains of thought. I mean, you can come in and, as you say, come in and do one and get it right, and then do the sync function. So what Mike is talking about is you would come in and edit this photo, for instance. You'd adjust all the various bits and pieces that you want. So do all of your sliders. And then what you can do is, with the image you've edited as the primary image, you can highlight all of the other images. And then you get this sync button down here on the bottom right hand corner. And this will bring up this dialog box, which allows you then to pick the edits that you've made that you want to synchronize across all of those photographs. So you could go and edit on one of these images and then sync it across. And I think the answer to your question, Mike, is probably a combination of both, because there's certain edits you might make to the image that you would synchronize. There might be edits that you would do to each individual photo itself, and there might be edits that you would then do to the final image. So you might choose to do your dust spot correction on each image in Lightroom itself, which you wouldn't sync across all of the photos because they're all different photos. If you were doing an HDR photograph, they are all exactly the same photograph, you've just bracketed them. So you could do your dust spot corrections on one image, and then you could sync those dust spot corrections across all three images, because they're going to be exactly the same place on every single image. If you removed the branch out of one image, like I did earlier, you could sync that edit across all three to save you having to do it on all of them. Check that it looks okay in every single one, which most of the time it will do, and then you can then merge them all together. So experiment with different ways of doing it, and if one of them doesn't work,
Go back.
try another one. Go for the one with the least amount of work first. So I would kind of go down the route of blend it all to merge it together like we've done there, and then have a look. But if you found there was particular issues, you might want to go and change it. Particularly challenging would be sunrise or sunset, where maybe one side of the photo is really kind of high brightness, and then the other side's really sort of dark shadows because of the width of it, and you might want to do some balancing of different ones there. But again, play with them. That perfectly brings me on to the next example that I wanted to kind of show you. So Mike has talked there about the sync function, which, as I say, let me just 2 seconds, I just pick this image here. So let's say I come into this image and I make all of my horrendous edits, and that's what I've decided to do. I could then say, well, actually, I want to blend these 3 images like Mike has suggested, but I want to do those exact same images, edits on the other 3 images. So I can click those, and I know it's the basic panel, so I can do my sync, and actually I can say it was the basic panel that I've just edited. And if I wanted to say, well, actually, I don't want the black clipping or whatever, but I'm just going to say sync everything. It's going to bring across the lens corrections because it knows I've made some lens corrections, and it knows that there's been an adjustment to sharpening, etc. You can then sync those settings across all 3, and then you make sure that they all have the consistent edit before you then go and do the merge and the blend. So that's the sync, and say that's for multiple edits, so whether it's spot removal or lens corrections or color, especially if you've got, I mean, we've been talking here about blending images together, but if this was a set of photographs which you'd taken maybe at a wedding, or on a particular day, and you were doing them as a set of photographs which you wanted to print, and you wanted them all to feel the same and not look completely different when they were taken 2 seconds apart of the same thing. You can do one edit, get it right, and then sync that edit across that whole set of photographs to make sure that they all look okay. So one way of doing that is to use this sync function and to do all these edits, and that can sync anything that you've done within this set of right-hand developed panels. The other thing that you can do, so I'm just going to reset those horrendous edits back to original, is just as an example. Now these are bracketed shots for me to do HDR with it, but it will show you what Lightroom could do. So if you had taken a set of photographs on a day, wedding would be a really good example, but you wanted to make sure that from a tonal point of view, an exposure point of view, they all look the same, they all feel the same. What you can do is you can select the primary photograph using the shift key, click the other photographs that you want to apply this to, and then I can't remember which one it is. Yeah, settings. You've got a menu option here, match total exposures. And what that's going to do is that's going to analyze each of the pictures, and within a few seconds, as that's doing, as it's done. Yeah, it's done it. So now it's applied it there. So now this one was the normal one, this was the really dark one, and this was the really bright one. Now when you go across them, actually from a tonal point of view or an exposure point of view, they're all very much the same now, rather than what they were previously, which if I do Control Z and roll them back, so if I come to that one there and do a reset, that was obviously what that one originally looked like. This was the brighter one, so that's what that originally looked like before all the edits. But actually just by selecting them, going to settings and match tonal exposures, that will take the tone exposure value from this one and match them across all of your photographs so that they all feel like they're the same. So that's a real handy, that's a fairly new enhancement, I think. It certainly wasn't there a couple of versions ago, and I've seen a lot on YouTube about it fairly recently, so I think that's been brought in. So sync settings is what Mike was talking about earlier, and that's this down here in the bottom right hand corner. So that's for syncing these edits, but match total exposures allows you to pick all of the photographs to make sure they all feel right at the same time. Okay. Let's look. Done that. Okay. So let's come back to let's take that one there that we've created just as something different. Excuse me, hang on. Okay, so we talked about the basic panel. We've talked about detail, lens correction, transform. Couple of other ones we'll cover off really quickly. So effects is basically if you want an old-fashioned style photograph, you can add grain to it. So you can see in here, if we come in, we're adding grain to it. So by adding sort of noise to the photograph, if that's a effect you want to apply. And the other one is vignette. So if you want to darken down or whiten, you can get a particular style. So sometimes white looks quite nice on a black and white photograph, or black will do. And again, in here you can go quite subtle. So you can get that particular effect. Now that's a consistent edge all the way around, whereas if we use the radial filter, we could offset that same effect just by taking the exposure down with a strong feather, but making the center of it over the church on the hill rather than on the center of the image. So again, personal taste. The other thing that you can do with this, I showed in Photoshop when we had a little break, just putting a white edge around the photograph. If that's something that you want to do, this will do it for you. It is not quite as nice as doing it in Photoshop, but actually if we crank up white on there, and if we then say roundness and feather and play with these, you can add a little white border to your image. Now, Photoshop, you could create those corners. It will give you a nice square corner. You can't do that in Lightroom, but if you're happy, if you wanted a little white border like that and you're happy with the round corners, that's something that you can quickly and easily achieve in Lightroom. So it's just a little different type of vignette. But that might be nice if you then wanted to print that and then stick that in a photo card or something like that. It will just give you that nice little white edge.
Can you vary the thickness of the edge?
You can do a little bit, so you can kind of, you can bring it in here, but you're quite limited to what you can do. There's been a lot of research Again, I can share the information with Mike afterwards. There's a fantastic website I came across which talks about when you're printing images, what size borders, white borders you should have around different shapes and what proportions they should be. And there's actually quite a science to it. And if they're too big, they don't look right, and if they're too small, they don't look right. And how do you know what's wrong and what's right? And you're going to send it off to print, and then you send it off and go, oh my god, that looks horrendous. So it's a really good, a really nice, it's a very basic website. I think it's been around for a long time, but the information on it I found was really useful to help you. It deals with different sizes and shapes of photographs as well, so whether you want a square one or a landscape or a portrait, and those kind of things. So it's quite a useful info. But typically that the white edge there wouldn't be enough. But if, as I say, if you were doing a card or something like that, that might be really quite nice. Or even if you just did that as a simple postcard, that might work really well, just to frame the photograph that you're doing without having to jump into Photoshop. So take that back off. So really quite simple. So that's the effects panel. There's nothing more to it than that, really. So we've done that. So I talked right at the beginning about kind of a workflow going through. So very roughly what I've tried to do is to do image file preparation. So this is your white balance, your noise reduction, your dust spot removal, straightening, transforming, chromatic aberration. So getting the image prepared and cleaned up, ready for your kind of next stage of your workflow. And that is broken down into your global and your local edits. So looking at the global edits first, what you're going to do and adjust the whole image, and then looking at local edits. Okay, I want to just brighten the sunshine part on these rocks and I don't want it to affect anything, or I just want to do the contrast on the clouds. So again, that then starts to become your local edits. Once you've gone through those kind of edits, you're then looking at making sure you've got an even exposure. So making sure that it feels right, that the sky is not too dark and the lights, the land's not too, they feel like they belong together, they don't look wrong. And sometimes that can be the fact that you've put the wrong filter on your camera when you're out there and it's suddenly become too dark and you want to brighten it up, or vice versa. So again, just getting that nice even exposure, if you like, using the histogram and the tools in Lightroom. So this is all about preparing the image. Once you've done that sort of preparation and you've cleaned it all up and you've got it ready, then you're into elements of more personalization, if you like, sort of color correction, and then adding some kind of drama. So at the beginning of the first session, I talked about when you're taking the photograph, have something in mind, have a story that you're trying to tell, and that's where ultimately, from an edit point of view, I've taken some what I think are really nice photographs, but then when I've got back, I've been really disappointed because from a compositional point of view, I feel really happy. I've had some really nice feedback, but I've missed the drama. So I've got there just as the sun's dipped behind the hill, and I haven't got the light on the hill. So I've got colour in the sky. So it's just looking at those kind of things. So now what you're into, so we've prepared the image, we've got it all ready. So from a colour point of view, so we've done exposure, we've done tonal edits. You've now got calibration, which is what colours the camera, what red is what the camera says is red. And you can adjust this. So in here you're looking at, okay, and this is a global edit. So if we wanted to look at red, we can adjust what is red. So we can look at the sky, sunset. So we're increasing that. That's affecting obviously the bracken here and the sky up on there because we've moved the hue of it. Or if we left it where it was, we can actually bring up the saturation. We can go really horrendous, but actually you could push that up and go, that's too far, and then you could start to bring that back down and go, actually, I quite like that about there. And I tend to then look at the numbers and bring it down a little bit more until you feel that that's about right. And again, you can look at the before and afterwards just to make sure that it's what you want it to be. So you can adjust the global settings of the colors within the image. Some people really like to I don't understand it. I think there's a science behind it, but green is a really difficult color in a photograph. Maybe Mike or Trevor, if that's an area of your expertise, that'd be really useful to do a session about when is green green and not green.
We need to educate the judges, I think.
So you can, I've seen a lot of people, there's a lot of things online where one of the things they do, Mike, one for you, and John with your presets, when you come to a personal style, there's a local lady who I know called Emily Endine, who does a lot of photography. She has a particular style. When you look at her photographs online, you know it's one of hers before you've even seen her name. She uses Lightroom 100%. She has presets she's created, and when she's finished the image, she'll apply the preset to it to give it that feeling, that Emily Endine stamp, if you like. And some of those are creating a preset to say that for every image, you're going to reduce the saturation of green by 40. And you're going to increase the blues by 10 to give it that kind of feel. And that's all down to personal taste. And sometimes that is your stamp. There's Nick Lucas is another guy I've followed. He goes the other way. He punches colours up rather than Emily, who softens and reduces them. And I find that quite a fascinating subject in its own right. So in here, go in and have a play. You can, obviously, using these sparingly, you're doing the whole overall color shift and telling, well, red isn't what you think red is this. So you can override it. That's then supported by a couple of other tabs. They're pretty big, so we're not going to go into them in lots of detail. So I'm obviously conscious it's nearly 10 o'clock. You've got the HSL, hue, saturation, luminance, and color tabs. So you've got hue, you've got the saturation, you've got the luminance, or you've got all, which is going to create this enormous one here. And with all of these, you've got sliders, which you're used to, so you can play around with them. So hue, obviously the color of it. What color is that color? Obviously the saturation, so how saturated is, or the brightness of that particular color. And you've got a little dot here which you can pick, and if you said, actually this orange here, I want to boost it, and I wanted to do the saturation, for example, you can pick that, you can do that, holding your mouse key down, slide the mouse up or down, and you can see the sliders, multiple sliders going, which are affecting that particular area. And then using this little toggle, I can turn on and off the adjustment that I've just done, but it's targeted a little bit of orange and quite a lot of the yellow, which for this area of the sky makes sense. And I might want to click on the orange bit there, just push that up a little bit more. So that's now starting to move the reds and a bit more orange. And you can see that particular area there, I've just increased the punch of that particular area. So you can do that in there. And color, see in here, you can then start to come in and pick on particular colors or all colors, and you can then start to play with all of these particular sliders, the RGBs, the red, green, blues, or HSL. So mess around to the color area to your heart's content, whether you want to boost or soft or remove color as you see fit. So that's the HSL and color panel. The final one really in the color area is split toning. So split toning is a way of introducing multiple colors into different areas, so into the lights and the shadows. So if you wanted to, you can come in here and you can pick, I don't know, pick that color, and we'll bring up the saturation in the highlights. So we've brought in a bluey. Actually, I want to bring in some, let's go up into the reddy tones, purely just so that you can see it on the screen. And then in the shadows, I want a colder blue, so complementary, and then bring up the saturation on that to whatever you want. So we're affecting highlights and shadows. And then you have a balance. So you can actually slide that up and down. So we're obviously pushing right up one end, or more towards the warms or more towards the cold. And so it's putting less red in the highlights and more blues in the shadows by coming one way, and going the other way, it's doing the opposite. So you can, sunrises, sunsets, and certain types of photography, that really works quite nicely. Again, quite subtle. You can make some horror stories with it quite quickly, but that's the concept of it. And you can pick your color from here. So you can use this slider, but if you want to be more specific, click the color itself. And then here, obviously, this is your the brightness or the luminance and the hue, so moving up and down and left and right. So if you wanted a kind of orangey red, you can come and pick up in here, and then you can pick that little cross, and again in here you can then start to pick, I don't know, I want a deeper blue, and then move that. And then if you want to just bring the saturation down, you can do that. I mean, obviously I've cranked them right up so that you can see what it's doing, but again, quite subtle. So that's split toning. So I'm going to just turn all of those right down, put that back in the middle. So again, different type of color editing. So calibration, global, HSL and color, global, or using local masks. You can do some of that through there, and then split toning is a global edit across the whole photo. So we've done all of that.
We're nearly there, aren't we, Jack?
We have, yep. The only one I've not touched on is that tone curve.
Yeah.
So tone curve is a whole topic of its own. I tend to just go in and do an S-curve, simple S-curve, so giving it a bit of contrast and a bit of punch. But loads online about it. You can put dots in and you can very quickly make a mess of any photo. So you have to be very careful with this. But there's a few built-in ones all for you if you want strong contrast, or just simple. Or you can go in and be a little bit more specific, or if you had a particular area, again, you can pick that little dot. You can then start to pull down, so you can see on the curve where it is as you move around, so that you know what area you're going to impact, and you can brighten or darken, and there's a whole kind of science behind it. So I'm not an expert in tone curves yet. So again, if that's a session somebody could do to help going forward, I find that really interesting. So that's tone curves. And then I suppose the final part, you've finished all of this, you've done everything that you want to do and all of your edits, and now you want to do something with your final image. So you can right click on here and you have export. And if I just click export, hopefully you can see a dialog box has appeared.
Yep, that's right.
And here Mike's touched on it in some of the beginner class sessions. Here are all of the things that you can choose to do as export. So the location of the file that you want to spit out, file naming, so how do you want to name it when you put it out. It can do videos. I've never done it, so I can't tell you anything about that, I'm afraid. File settings, so when it's a JPEG, color space, sRGB, depending on what you're doing with the image, choose the matching one. The quality of the file. File image sizing, so you can size it in here. So for club competitions where we got to fit within certain sizes for it to go on the projector that Trevor and Mike send round, you can come in here. So I've got a preset one here, Ringwood Camera Club Open Competitions. That's the export I use for all of my photos if I want to put it into a competition. That's what I would use. That's got all of the settings that Trevor sends round historically built into it. Output sharpening, that's kind of different to the sharpening that you've got in here. And for sharpening, there's a whole, again, science about sharpening the image for the export that you're doing. Because if you sharpen it full size and then scale it to a different size to output it, you've kind of lost the sharpening, which may be good or bad. So again, but this is a different type of sharpening. So you can sharpen the image and sharpen it for what you're doing, but then when you output, you can turn that on and use that sharpening as well, and that can really help. Metadata. What metadata do you want in the image? If it's got personal information in there, you might want to remove it. You might want to remove GPS locations because you don't want people to know where the photograph was taken, if that's appropriate. But you might want to retain your copyright information within your photograph. So this is where you can tell it what to keep and what not to keep. Watermarks, signatures. So this is applying your signature to it. So I've got one here. It's web, so that's for Facebook, etc. It's a JPEG. It's got no signature, or with a white watermark, so that's got a white signature on the image. And then I've got high-res ones for wallpapers and one for white wall, who I use for printing. So all of those are kind of preset. And then there's an A5 card one, so I make some Christmas cards and birthday cards and things like that for friends and family. So that's the preset that I use there. And the presets basically just remember all of these settings that you've created, and when you've done the ones that you want to do, you can click the add button. It will create it in here and you can save it. And then you would hit the export button, and that will then spit that file out with whatever you've told it to do into the folder you've told it to put it in. And at the end, I always tell it to open the folder where I've put it, because quite often I forget where I've put it. So that's always helpful that it opens the folder. But it can do various different things when you've finished. And that's kind of the export, which I'm not going to click, but yeah, you just literally hit that and away it goes. And that's covered everything, he says, looking at. Yep, that's covered everything.
Well done.
So,
Brilliant. Thank you.
10. So
You've done well there. Let's get Trevor's on.
Yeah, say thank you very much, Andy. That was brilliant, and say hopefully people have picked up some good and useful tips. I certainly have, and say it's a great way of processing your photographs, Lightroom. And if you do get the package, you get Photoshop with it, so you can dip in and out of that as you want to. And I think it's about £9 a month at the moment, the package from Adobe that gives you Lightroom and Photoshop. You've always got the latest version. As a cost for our hobby goes, it's not a high one if you consider the price of the kit.
yeah,
we have to pay for and everything else. The software is actually relatively cheap.
and there's There's a little trick as well at the moment, Trevor. If you go in and you put it in your shopping basket, and then you decide not to buy it and you back out, you tend to get an email telling you that there's a discount and they'll offer you, and it drops from £9.99 or whatever it is a month to £8 something.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Another trick is look on Black Friday.
Yep.
Because there's often a Photoshop deal from Adobe around about Black Friday.
Yep.
I get mine for about half price at the moment because of that.
If anybody's got children or grandchildren who are of a schooling age, if you go on to, because this is my world, software sales, and I help very large companies with very expensive software. There's a website called Software for Students. So it's the number 4, software for students.co.uk. It's totally legit. It's sponsored by the Microsofts and the Adobes of the world, and in there you can get massive discounts for educational software. So if you are buying Photoshop and Lightroom, etc., for your children, because of course you would do, why wouldn't you do, you can get some significant discounts. So things like Microsoft Office as well, you can get it for £20 instead of £400 kind of discounts. So well worth going in there, whether it's for children, for grandchildren. Microsoft are quite lax about it because they want children to have it, because it's good that they learn it, because when they get into work they know it really well. So it's a loss leader for them. Adobe are a little bit stricter. They will ask for details of your school or the child's school, which if you've got one, you just put it in and you will get some discounts. So always worth checking that out. And there's other applications in there. There's antivirus stuff as well by some of the big vendors. So softwareforstudents.co.uk.
Worth remembering.
Very good.
Well, as I say, thank you. Let's make a note of that. Thank you very much indeed. That was an excellent evening.